As Hiro crests the pass on his motorcycle at 5 in the morning, the town of Port Sherman, Oregon is suddenly laid out before him, a flash of yellow low glow, wrapped into a vast U-shaped valley that was ground out of the rock a long time ago by a big tongue of ice in an epical period of geological cunnilingus. There is just a light dusting of gold around the edges where it fades into the rainforest, thickening and intensifying as it approaches the harbor, a long, narrow, fjord-like notch cut into the straight coastline of Oregon, a deep, cold trench of black water heading straight out to Japan. Hiro's back on the rim again. Feels good after that night ride through the sticks. Too many rednecks, too many Mounties.
I have a theory, Chris, that I can always make you laugh if I can, tell you a story or throw an accent or something like that at you, but you can't be expecting it. It only works if it's a surprise. So if I give you, I can be like, so did you race in the Berkabiner? And I know that you're going to laugh every time. But if you know that I'm gearing up to say triglycerides, it's just not going to be as funny the second time around.
That's true, but the triglycerides thing is so good that I could, maybe that's the title of our new podcast is Triglycerides with Jesse and Chris, and all it is us batting the word triglycerides.
Triglycerides, which step?
Triglycerides.
Would you indulge me and allow me to tell our listener the triglyceride story?
Absolutely. I am curious, is this the anecdote that you were thinking of that you put in the rundown?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yes, and that's why I was watching Lord Robertson before we became... It was a kind of cramming a Scottish accent into my brain. You're naturally better at it than I am, but sometimes I can get there.
I'd say that yours is frightfully on point tonight. I keep slipping into some sort of Celtish barbarian.
Sort of an Ulster Scot. A Scot that travelled with Chichester across the Irish Sea to Ulster and became an Scots-Irish person and later descended...
That's no Scot at all.
That's no Scot at all. All right, so real quick, listener, our mutual friend, and by the way, I think we should keep his last name anonymous because part of the story involves his diet. He can decide if he wishes to identify himself later. Our friend Justin and I were hanging out recently, and I just discovered the greatest word to say with a Scottish accent because our friend Justin's doctor told him that the levels of his triglycerides were far too high.
This does it makes me think that there's a chance here for the two great entries into the Scottish accent, one of which you have now identified as triglycerides, but we could also combine it with fuck, which is the other good one.
His triglycerides are fucked, to be sure.
And we can even toss in a little bit of he should have ken what's coming to him, knowing that his triglycerides are fucked.
He should ken that he must bring them down.
Or nay, he had no idea, but he rightfully should have.
Didn't I know what he's thinking? That
one's a hard one. Didn't is... That's where understanding...
The dinner is fine.
Yeah.
It's getting to how you would say no. I know how Australians say no, which is no, but I don't know really how Scots say no. Didn't I know? Well, that's why you say Ken. It's easier to say.
Ken. Yeah. Right, because you're bumping into Dinne Nay and then you're just going to go with Dinne Ken. Yeah. And pretty quickly, no one from England can understand you, which is the whole point.
Right. Well, why would you want those bastards to understand you anyway? No Scot needs an Englishman to understand a word he says.
There's all these wonderful and horrible sort of British opinions of the Australian language about how it's like the worst corruption of the English accent of all time. It was just so classic British Empire, where they're splitting like the finest of hairs into these other tiny little hairs where you're like, oh my God, guys, get over yourselves.
As amusing as much fun as I have trying to sound like I'm doing a Scottish accent, any Scots would see right through. Like mine would not pass on the British Isles. I could maybe train
mine
it
either. Again, the real way in is Train Spotting the novel, which is just such. The fact that it's written in vernacular makes it just so much easier, and it's really helpful.
Well, and
I would suggest that one.
It's on, and I need to read it. The other day we were talking, and we also, if this podcast continues, I would love to read some Robert Louis Stevenson, who also wrote in Scottish dialect in the 1890s or something. We looked it up around the turn of the 20th century.
Then we'll get next week in Scottish literature.
Scottish literature. I still wish that hopefully there's some Scottish listeners who are like, I didn't understand what's so funny about triglycerides. It's not laughing matter.
And the best part about the way you're saying it is like it's verging into like this other form of steroid.
Triglycerides.
Yeah. There's like a whole bunch of Scots who are like, I've got to get my hands on that. Whatever these triglycerides are, let's go find some and do them.
Careful, I hear you get triglyceride rage. It'll make you fey and berserk.
But your triceps are huge.
Your triceps.
Yeah, listeners, welcome back to episode 1, part 2.
Okay, that's how you want
Upper
to say
Middlebrow.
If that's how you want to say it.
Yeah, episode 1, part 2 of Upper Middlebrow, our show where we occupy the upper middle tranche of the middle brow of culture.
Excellent. Wait. Can it be like a journal? Can this be volume 1, episode 2, since we're upper middle brow?
Perfect.
All right.
Done. I was explaining this show to my therapist right before we got on to record the first time. And just sort of walked him through like, okay, well, do you know that how no one in the United States wants to be upper class or lower class anymore? And he said yes. And I said, okay, well, are you also familiar with the, like, speaking of hair splitting, just like splitting up everything, like you very nicely put last week. There's upper middle class, and there's lower upper middle class, and there's upper lower middle class. And so I was kind of walking him through, okay, well, then there's also lowbrow and highbrow. And nobody wants to be lowbrow or highbrow anymore. I think particularly the authors and the creators that you and I are going to talk about, who would prefer to occupy the upper middle brow.
Right.
Which then leads into all sorts of wonderful facial jokes. Where is the upper middle brow if we are talking from a strictly biological point of view?
It's true. I believe the term goes back to the eugenics movement, like highbrow and lowbrow. That which is not. It has come to mean.
Really?
Sorry, I'm not endorsing that view of it. I'm just saying that metaphors begin in terrible places sometimes.
I did not know that. I did not know that was the source of highbrow and lowbrow.
Yeah, so people with higher eyebrows were thought to be more intelligent than people with lower eyebrows.
Oh, God.
I think you could fact check me, but I'm reasonably confident that's true.
I mean, you're pretty good with your with those kinds of facts.
Yeah, but I will also just make them up sometimes.
I mean, as we all hearken for the pre-internet days when bullshitting was a lot more fun, which was something I remember you and I have talked about that before.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it was interesting because you mentioned Robert Jordan the other day. We were having an administrative meeting, and I was like, I think that's a little too lower middle brow for me. I don't know that I ever want to read Robert Jordan's books again, although I did very much enjoy the first one, I will say. But I feel like I have only so many hours of my life left, and I just don't know if I want to give Robert Jordan very many of those hours. Whereas like we've talked about writers like, Patrick O'Brien, or even someone like Michael Chabon, who's considered sort of a literary writer, but I think is accessible. To me, it's high craft plus accessibility equals upper middle brow.
I like that. I think that's a good. I think that's a good definition, and hopefully, our listeners will have sat through the last 10 minutes of us getting to the definition of the show. But that's
well, hopefully
that's
they
part of
sat
what
through
we're
the
doing.
last episode and they know what it's all about already, anyway. Too.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, Snow Crash. The second half of the book. We're gonna do it once again. Our very quick plot recap. You went first last time, so I'm gonna try and I don't know. I'm gonna do like the first 5 or 6 chapters from the second half of the book. We start the second half of the book in the first different narrator that we've had for like the whole time, when we get Y.T's mom working in Fedland and going through polygraph tests. This then shifts to this whole second half of the book I'm going to call the action sequence, because that really is what happens. Hiro is on his way to try to get on board the raft where Elbab Raif, the enemy of our story, is attempting to undo the Tower of Babel. So everybody speaks the same language, and so he can infect the entire world with his metavirus and basically become King of Kings. So Hiro needs to get up to Oregon. I love reading this book now, having been a resident of Oregon, and then like comparing that to like what 14-year-old Chris's idea of Oregon was like. And actually like 14-year-old Chris's idea of Oregon, and I know Neal Stephenson has spent some time in the Northwest. They're actually pretty similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get Hiro chops the head off of a racist member of the New South Africa Burbclave.
As far as we know, the first time Hiro has committed an actual act of violence in reality in his life.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah.
And I love that. I love this moment where it's like, and Hiro cuts his head off. Paragraph break. What else was he supposed to do? And then let's see, the section that I'm going to kick it back over to you. Y.T has to make a delivery to Fedland, where she knocks out an amazing number of federal agents. And then at the very last second is knocked out and abducted through the use of a weapon called a stun bunny, through one of my favorite passages in the book. But I will pass it back over to you, picking things up around chapter 42 or 43 as Hiro arrives in Port Sherman.
Sure. And I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out where Port Sherman is. Because as far as I can tell, there is no such thing as Port Sherman, but he describes the harbor as a fjord. And I spent, probably like a half hour looking at the Google Earth of the Oregon coast, seeing if I could find anything. The only thing that came close was like something near Astoria, but I feel like it's supposed to be farther south than I thought. I mean, maybe that real Port Sherman is actually in Washington. But also, by the way, that Fed chapter I want to talk about. I think maybe my favorite chapter of the second half, and the last, in my view, like really great chapter of the book. But okay, so Hiro goes to this sleepy little coastal town that is kind of swarming with Russian Orthodox immigrants and some mafia folks. There's some melee happening. The other thing is, you talked about the head chopping. There was an exposition scene where Hiro interviewed some like former president of a breakaway state in Oregon, and got a very scary story about Raven stealing a nuclear sub, which he, in partnership with like a former KGB officer, murdering like half the people in the ship, and we learned that he has glass knives. And essentially bringing that ship and allying with both Elbab Raif and also these Russian Orthodox ex-KGB types who are just bad dudes. So there's some kind of conflagration at the Port Sherman docks. Hiro's able to talk his way onto the dock. He's trying to hire a yacht. It turns out the mafia has got there first, and our old friend Fisheye, who we've met in an earlier chapter, is there orchestrating some military action against these Russian Orthodox people in the hope that he can take them captive. It looks like he's going to succeed, but Raven shows up on a kayak in the last moment and foils his plans, and then a submarine shows up, sinks the yacht, and strands Hiro, Fisheye, and a few other people in the cold, chilly waters off Oregon in a lifeboat. Meanwhile,
Elliot Chung and Vic.
Yeah, Elliot. I forgot Elliot Chung's name, the captain of the boat, who is a Chinese, Filipino man who, according to Neal Stephenson, talks like an African American from L.A. And at the same time, Y.T. is sort of like ends up in a van with sort of culty L. Bob Rife followers, and eventually ends up on the raft where she's kind of forced to do menial labor under the supervision of a bunch of Russian Orthodox women. And I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, that section of Y.T.'s story takes a real turn when Raven shows up in the cafeteria where Y.T. has now been assigned to be a cafeteria dame. And Raven takes her on a date to a restaurant where she tries to order a cheeseburger. And he says, "There's no beef out here." And she says, "Anything but fish." And he orders her squid.
A gentleman, as she says. Yeah.
A gentleman. Yeah. The last of the seafaring gentlemen of his kind. Raven leaves the date to go and kill almost everybody on the boat that Hiro and Elliot and Fisheye and Vic have gotten onto after killing Bruce Lee the pirate. Again, just trying to come up with a synopsis for this book is banana. They have taken over a fishing trawler from a pirate who goes by the name of Bruce Lee, who is supposed to have made a jacket out of the scalps of red and silver-haired refugees that live on the raft. And Hiro at one point notes, "Oh, there's no way, it's too uniformly colored. That guy must have just taken a whole bunch of scalps and just dyed them all the same."
Yeah, he's a chump. He didn't actually seek out the pre-colored scalps. He dyed scalps that he already had. After a certain amount of rape humor, I'll add too. There was like several thousand words worth of rape humor in the middle of all that.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk about moments where this book hasn't aged well.
Yeah, the rape humor would be on that list.
Is one of them.
Yeah.
I think, Fisheye's line, "Wait a second, these guys are homos?" Which you're like, oh, come on.
Yeah, no, and the captain says, no, they're het, but they'll really go after anything.
Warm and concave.
I will say that Fisheye is understood to be being illiberal in that moment. Like, that's not supposed to, that's part of Fisheye's sort of chauvinism, is that he's being a bit intolerant in that moment.
Elliot has a great line where he's like, "You didn't even bat an eye when we talked about the scalps." You're like, all right, yeah, so effective character drawing, Mr. Stephenson. But it was the early 90s. So let's see. I'm going to try to... It turns into a fetch quest. Hiro gets into a whole bunch of different fights with different members of the raft. At one point, engaging the ship-to-ship guns of the USS Enterprise himself, with this little Gatling gun that he has procured from Fisheye called Reason.
A rail gun that fires spent uranium pellets at hypersonic speeds.
And at one point during this, he is able to goggle into the metaverse to speak with Y.T., Uncle Enzo, the head of the mafia, Mr. Ing, the arms dealer, and Mr. Lee, the head of Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong. And I will kick it back on over to you.
And in that chapter, we get a chapter that is basically just like, were you paying attention to all the exposition before? If not, here's the cliff notes. And it's I mean, it is almost audaciously just a pure exposition chapter, and but the premise, the conceit, is that Hiro is explaining all of this to Uncle Enzo, Mr. Lee, Mr. Ng, so that gives him an excuse to do exposition, and that he's also getting paid to do so as well. But I'm not going to go into it now, but basically we get the whole sort of explanation of how the virus works, how the deep structures of the brain works, the Nam Shub of Enki, all these other things. I think the thing we really most need to understand is that Elbab Rife has a way of controlling people's brains, and that Hiro believes he can stop that using the Nam Shub of Enki, and that he starts questing after that while kind of maintaining contact through the metaverse with Y.T. Y.T, after a terrible series of events with Raven that I believe Stephenson thinks is supposed to be funny, has incapacitated Raven and is jacked in to the metaverse and trying to help Hiro, but she's captured and then brought to Elbab Rife to be used as a hostage, and that really kind of sets up this endgame series of chapters where Elbab Rife is flying to the United States. I don't quite know what he's going to do in America, to be honest. I haven't quite figured that out. Raven, recovered from his incapacitation, is gone to the metaverse to unleash a secret weapon on a bunch of hackers who are going to be attending a conference. Hiro is reunited with the love of his life, Y.T, who has been pretending to help Elbab Rife, but actually is studying this new religion and this biohacking thing, and actually decides to show her true colors and help Hiro. And that sets up the absolute final confrontation. I'll also say that as they're flying back to the United States, Y.T engages in an escalating series of Nancy Drew type behavior to foil Elbab Rife's plan. That is very entertaining, and maybe some of my favorite moments in the book. But I'll let you finish it from there.
Yeah, the crowning glory of those Nancy Drew moments. Elbab Rife has a clay envelope that is a Sumerian artifact that we learn in that lore dump of an expositional chapter is the thing that can kind of inoculate him against all of the stuff that he's trying to do. If anybody were to come after him, he would be able to
or
use
any of his allies. Like it's a
and that's the thing that Hiro is trying to get. He's trying to get that clay envelope. And there's this wonderful moment where Y.T kicks it out of the helicopter in which she is being abducted from.
But she continues to be a thorn in Elbab Rife's side.
Oh yes, she certainly does. In fact, like the thorn,
right?
Like she is, and I want to talk a bunch about Y.T in this tonight.
She deserves
because she deserves it. I also think she really got away from Stephenson and became really the highlight of the book in a way that like sometimes that happens with authors.
Yeah.
Yes, so there's this confrontation. It ends at LAX airport as Elbab Rife is trying to escape. There is a fun battle between Raven and Uncle Enzo.
Yeah.
When we discover that Uncle Enzo is in fact like a pretty badass hand-to-hand combatant.
All of which was foreshadowed in his conversation with Y.T earlier.
The rat thing that we discussed early on is in fact the tool of the final coup de grace of bringing Elbab Rife down. Because the rat thing, of course, has an affection for Y.T. And as Elbab Rife's plane is trying to fly off into the sunset, the rat things actually jump through the airplane, turning it into, like a gigantic fireball, ridding the world of this villain. And I'm not sure from your question about letdown, basically rendering the last third of Snow Crash a pretty pat action adventure novel.
Yeah. The one, so two things I think that's important to note that you missed. And one is that Y.T was also able to get a whole band of fellow delivery skateboarders to pull L. Bob Reif's helicopter out of the sky with their harpoons, and then she single-handedly destroys his helicopter with a harpoon, which is a wonderful moment. And then also there's a lovely scene in the metaverse where Hiro foils Raven's attempt to essentially infect all the hackers with Snow Crash. And it basically involves every single eccentric hobby that Hiro has makes him the perfect hero for this moment, because it requires, motorcycle racing, sword fighting, and specifically virtual motorcycle racing.
Virtual motorcycle racing.
Virtual
Very
sword
important.
fighting, hacking, concert promotion, so he is able to save the day in a way that only hero protagonists possibly could with that particular set of skills. And it is a very brilliant bit of plotting that allows Hiro to be put in a situation where that very eccentric and, kind of, immature set of skills proves to be just what is needed to save the world at that moment. It is a real 14-year-old nerd who likes sword fighting and computers fantasy. But it's also a pretty great scene, and it's completely plausible, and it also contains this interesting story within a story about, Aleuts, and the end of World War II and Hiro's father in a Japanese POW camp, too.
That's right, because we do get that scene where Hiro and Raven talk to each other as they are trying to kill each other in the metaverse. And it's good. And we learn all of this backstory about Raven. And like a lot of the characters in Stephenson's books, that like there is like a plausible reason for for the things that they're doing. He does save his like true mustache twirling villains for L. Bob Reif in this one. Like he's really the only true
Raven
bad guy.
is behaving very badly. He does have some motivations, but he's driven mad by seeking vengeance and willing to kill billions of innocent people in order to have his vengeance. So, but yeah, an interesting character too. I guess the other thing I will add to that is like Stephenson creates the only scenario imaginable in which Hiro could actually best Raven. It's Uncle Enzo actually defeats Raven in reality. Hiro barely manages to defeat Raven only in the space in which Hiro is at his most powerful, and Raven is quite a bit diminished, as someone who doesn't hang out in the metaverse all the time. And yet it works. I actually liked that scene quite a bit.
Yeah, it's nice to hear them, and it's a nice piece of like scene setting as well, because the way that Stephenson has set it up, where they can talk to each other organically while they are trying to like kill each other in the metaverse and race these motorcycles that can basically go infinite speeds. It's nice. I mean, that's one of the things about Stephenson as a novelist, is that his like we can say a lot of critical things. Like one thing we can't say is that he's not a craftsman. Just that detail that you brought up about the fact that this is the only area in which Hiro would be able to defeat Raven, that is set up in the second chapter, right? Which is an impressive piece of craft. And And for by and large, he manages to keep the ball in the air, even though there are these big expositional sections. I do think the action adventure part kind of gets away with him.
Yeah,
Gets away
I
from him a little
actually
bit.
thought this half is more boring than the first half. I don't I mean, and I would say the first couple of times I read this book, I was completely entertained by the second half. But this time I kind of knew what was going to happen, and the moments that you and I found so profound in the first half, they are more few and far between, I thought the race, what we're describing, the dialogue between Raven and Hiro, was one of those moments. I definitely think the chapter with the toilet paper memo narrated by Y.T.'s mom is definitely one of those moments. Just maybe, one of the best chapters in the entire book. And I would have some criticisms of Stephenson's politics, because I feel like what he's criticizing about government culture, you could, it's bureaucratic corporate culture is every bit, if not more, egregious in certain respects. But I found those moments were fewer and farther between, and there was just, it's really more. It's like he spends half of the book building the chessboard and putting the chess pieces on the board, and then the rest is just having them all fight, and if you read a lot of Stephenson's books, they're kind of like that, where like the last half or the last third, even some of the new ones that I think are actually great books, often the last half or the last third is like this adventure story, now that we've kind of explained what the parameters of the world are. And I was there for that the first time I read it and the second time, but now this read, knowing I already sort of knew the plot. It just wasn't quite as fun to read as the first half, I thought.
Yeah, there are fewer surprising moments. It is all like, the prose never loses steam. There are, still brilliant sentence after brilliant sentence, even if we are describing things like the holes that Reason the railgun makes in the size of the Enterprise. But there's just not enough of. It's funny. Like Stephenson, there's like three writers. There's this very intelligent, like, oh, I want to cram a bunch of ideas in here. And then there's this kind of freewheeling action adventure guy. And then I think there are like those moments with like Y.T.'s mom and Y.T. and the rat thing. Oh, I was wrong. That is the other moment of another narrator that we get, because we do have that chapter where the rat thing narrates,
which is great. I love the rat thing chapters.
Yeah, they're marvelous. And those are, I think, like, that's what actually gives this book its life. It's like the old James Merrill thing about like, oh, you forgot to put the emotion in. Go back upstairs and keep writing until you've actually put some emotion in here. And I think that those characters and those moments, because the rat thing is so loving. It's just this like simple, loving creature that's like, there are bad men doing bad things, and it is my job to do bad things to those bad men, because I want to protect that nice girl that was very nice to me. And Y.T.'s mom, who is this just very kind of tragic figure as she tries to get through to the people, putting her through a horrible polygraph test where she really makes an appeal to them to just talk. And the answer is to basically sedate her.
Yeah, no, and Y.T.'s mom is a tragic character and sort of sad, and there are a couple moments where it's clear that Y.T. is aware of that and actually has a deep well of concern and affection for her mom, although, a lot of the times you're not aware of that because it's not what she's thinking about. She's thinking about like how she's gonna, like, what's the one-liner she's gonna throw at whatever like asshole dude is like giving her hassle at any given moment, or like how she's gonna escape a situation, or like who she wants to sleep with, but well, yeah, I mean, maybe talking about Y.T., I asked you this last time. My question for you is there any reason Y.T. couldn't be 19 or 20, which would solve a couple of the really icky moments?
I thought about this, and the one that popped into my head, and I'm layering 1990s and early aughts kind of like way of thinking about this. it's the best way to keep her in the house with her mom.
She could be but she could be taking classes at a community college and still living with her mom or something like that. Like a lot of people live with their parents, particularly you can imagine it in this dystopian future where, life is hard. I think that's possibly it. Just to come out and say it, not only does Y.T. have what is represented as a consensual sexual relationship with Raven, and we're already given to understand that Y.T. is sexually active and has sex with her boyfriend, but her boyfriend seems to be roughly her age, so that seems less icky. And that she kind of has maybe a little bit of a crush on Hiro, and it's like, all right, well, she's 15, but Hiro doesn't pursue that, so that all just seems kind of normal. But then, Y.T. and Raven have sex, and it's described from Y.T.'s perspective in a way that is just like, I know that 15-year-olds do have sex, but I don't think it's appropriate for adults to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't think it's sexy. I don't think it's funny. I think it's just and I wish that scene wasn't in there.
Yeah, it's there's no good way to make this scene like anything other than the ickiness that it is, other than, as you said, like, for God's sakes, why couldn't we have made her 19?
Yeah, and even then it would be a little bit icky, but I'm described in a way that would make me a little bit uncomfortable. But the thing I think about, that I don't know if you've ever read, but there's these memos between George Lucas and Steven Spielberg about Marianne's character in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The woman who's the love interest in the first movie, and it's implied that she and Indy had been lovers several years before, and she's supposed to be in her mid-20s, he's in his mid-30s, so if you do the math, apparently they were lovers when he was 25 and she was like 14 or 15 or something like that, which, you don't really do the math if you're watching that movie, and her age is never explained. So in the movie it's not that bad, but if you read the memos back and forth, they're talking about let's say that they were lovers maybe when she was 19 and he was 25, and then one of them, I think it's Lucas, is like, no, make it 15, let's make it edgy, let's make the audience not sure how they feel about it. And I just think that there was, in an earlier era, there was a certain kind of man especially that equated sort of things like statutory rape and social norms about sex between adult males and teenage girls as prudish, as the restrictions on that were prudish in the same way that the people trying to make abortion illegal were being prudes. They were just anti-sex. They were just trying to control. And so that if you were with it and you weren't a prude, who cares if a 25-year-old man has sex with, it's just edgy, and it's no, it's not edgy, it is fucked up, and I'm sure, I would imagine that Stephenson has matured to the point where he would never write something like this. He was in his early 30s and he should have known better then. But I would put it down to immaturity and also a kind of terrible blind spot of the era.
Yeah, of that particular moment in history, for sure.
Yeah.
That is I do wish there were a way to just change the age. Because it would make things a lot less icky.
Yeah, what you could do is go into your book, and every time it says 15, strike through and write 19.
19.
Maybe Stephenson could tweet it out. Y.T.
Hey, everybody.
Y.T. is now 19.
That would be awesome. What a glorious moment of authorial, Neal Stephenson, if you're listening. Do that.
I would support it.
Happen.
I would support it. That would be a wonderful edit.
Yes, this podcast would. This podcast says do it.
Yeah. Well, we all make mistakes, but that was a pretty bad one.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad one. But the thing I do love about this second half of this book is the way that Y.T. does become more central to the action, in a more interesting way than Hiro.
Yeah.
I think that as the book goes on, Hiro continues to be sort of the author stand-in. Stephenson's sort of idea of himself as this. I mean, there's that passage, I think from the first half of the book, where it says, for a certain amount of time, up until he's at his late 20s, every man imagines that he could become this kind of badass.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Neal Stephenson, this is your paragraph.
Yes.
This is you right now.
Yes.
And in the book, it's Hiro comparing himself to Raven. And in real life, I would think it's Stephenson's comparing himself to Hiro, wanting to be Hiro. And so Hiro kind of does the dutiful, heroic things that we would expect of our protagonist, which is to complete the fetch quest and triumph over the villain. But really, Y.T gets all the fun parts.
Yeah, and I will say that, I mean, Hiro, I think there's a moment when he cuts the head off of the racist person, and then also later on the boat when he's the only survivor. And also, I believe it's a little bit confusing, but I believe they actually destroy the fishing trawler, Bruce Lee's fishing trawler, but take the yacht. And they take the yacht to the raft, at which point they are attacked. And Hiro is the only survivor of that attack, except for the cabin boy, Transubstantione, Tranny for short. Another unfortunate joke. A little bit of a transphobic joke, Neal.
My God, it's like you're like, oh, there are these moments where you're like, dude. Yeah, no, it's bad. But Hiro's the only adult survivor, and I think there is supposed to be this sort of like moment where all these things he's fantasized about or practiced in the metaverse are coming true, and he proves capable in that moment. And I do think like you buy it. I don't know why, but you buy it. And he's wearing bulletproof vests and he has swords, and like you're kind of like, yeah, I suppose that if you had that Gatling gun and a bulletproof vest and you were logged into the metaverse and had a map, maybe you could fight your way to the Enterprise, especially since everybody else is like not as well armed, not as well equipped, and brainwashed and kind of stupid, and doesn't even really understand what the end game is. Like maybe you could do that. So it all seems kind of plausible and it's sort of fun. But then Y.T is and especially after, there's also a moment where she decides that it seems like she's also kind of scared of Raven, and there's a moment where she decides to just defy him too, and that's like a moment that must take some courage because he is a terrifying person too. And so she just has this infinite reserve of scrappiness, and it wins the day, and she's incredibly resourceful, and she's also, I'm sure her character is understood to be scared, but has this instinct that whenever, particularly like a grown-up scary male tries to intimidate her, her response is to like sass right back at them. That's what she does. And like that can be very, very dangerous, but she sticks to that. And in the end, like that capacity, her capacity, and she also has this insight. She figures out that she's a hostage, and she figures out that she's only good as a hostage if she's alive. And so she actually has a certain amount of power in the situation because they can't hurt her too much, or else she becomes a useless hostage, and she figures out. Which is the moment where she leaps out of the helicopter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. But there's a whole sequence of things she does to foil Elbab Rife. And, the Mafia and Mr. Ng and Mr. Lee are all trying, they have plans that they're cooking up, and those plans prove to be completely unnecessary. Like Y.T does all the work. Uncle Enzo gets to, kick Raven's ass, which is pretty great. But
that is a great moment. But yeah, I mean, Hiro, I think the point I was trying to make is like, the whole action adventure section is plausible, and it works, and it's fine, and the set pieces are great.
Yeah,
I mean those moments when like ships are turning into fireballs, and he describes that for a moment you can see, and like the image of like a fireball, and there's that strobe light effect, and Hiro notices that there's just ships everywhere trying to like board their ship,
like rats when you turn
Yeah.
the light on in your kitchen. Yeah, wonderful.
And so, I mean, the narration never flags.
Yeah.
Like, it is very good action writing, but from a character perspective, there's not a ton of change that happens for Hiro. Yeah, sure. He sort of realizes that he can pull it off and he can win the day. Y.T is sort of, I'm not crazy. It doesn't really pass the Bechdel test.
Yeah.
Y.T exists as this kind of like somewhat distant female figure for Hiro to aspire to.
Yeah, and also like I don't know. I mean, in the last taping we did, I said that Hiro was becoming a better, more mature person, and that's why Y.T likes him now, and maybe that's true. But like, it is a little bit like he just shows up, and we're meant to understand that their romance is rekindled again. And I guess it is incredibly romantic that he would show up on the raft trying to rescue her, like with his samurai swords and bulletproof black motorcycle outfit. Like, that's kind of badass, so maybe that's part of it. And he has figured out all the Nam Shub stuff. But that's basically, he just did the homework that she assigned him, He just had the robot butler, like, explain it all to him.
And Y.T does have that great moment where Hiro and Y.T are talking about Y.T.
Yeah. And
Hiro's like, I think it's going really well. Like, I think that I'm finally getting to understand her. And Y.T is like, you're an idiot. What she wants is she wants you to understand yourself.
Mm.
And like, you get the sense that Hiro's like, oh, okay. And it's, I mean, like, the book leaves those like more truthy things to Y.T.
Yeah.
Which I just love. Like, she is sort of the canniest character in this book that is mostly populated by like dudes who are ostensibly with power.
Right. Y.T is an excellent, with one exception, an excellent judge of character. That.
Which, like, I'm not crazy about that chapter and that setup. It is, as a piece of character crafting, I think it's an important moment of like making your characters not consistent. Like, I wish he would have picked a different way to achieve that, maybe. But
no,
yeah,
I mean, I guess it's good that she faltered in some way, and that she, that makes her a more interesting character too. I
wanted to. There's one part that I really wanted to talk about. It's the end of the chapter where Hiro cuts the guy from New South Africa's head off.
Yeah.
And then is pursued through this particular burbclave by these racists from New South Africa and the enforcers. And the chapter ends with Hiro getting onto his motorcycle and the New South Africans getting into their cars and the enforcers getting into their vehicles. And the last sentence of the chapter is, and after that, it's just a chase scene. I have so, and then when you put that against the next chapter, which is Y.T. in Fedland, one long chase scene.
Yeah.
It brings up I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Is this another joke? Is this Stephenson acknowledging the fact that he's about to do a whole bunch of action stuff and being like, you know what? It's not important, reader. And I'm just going to tell you that it's just a plot device and we're going to skip it.
Interesting question. I mean, so I have 3 responses to that. So response 1 is, I think part of it is that there's been a lot of foreshadowing buildup about Hiro's motorcycle, such that I think basically part of what that is saying is getting to the motorcycle is the same as escaping, because his motorcycle is just so much faster and better equipped than anything a bunch of like rednecks in like the greater Alcan, which is what the roads in Oregon are meant to be, like the sort of like Alaskan diaspora are likely to have. So I think it's supposed to reflect like a little bit of Hiro's cockiness in that situation too. Like, you know, yeah, once I'm on the motorbike, it's just a chase scene, and I'm gonna win any chase scene. Like I think there's an element of that going on. Two, though, I do think, you know, if you pair that with Y.T's chapter, and then if you pair it with the other excellent chase scene, which is the virtual motorcycle race between Hiro and Raven in the metaverse, where they're talking to each other, and Hiro's trying to cut Raven's head off, and Raven's trying to kill every hacker in the world. Both of those are better chase scenes. So maybe there is a way in which Stephenson's saying, like, yeah, after that's just a pretty boring chase scene. You know, I've got some better chase scenes in mind coming up soon. But then my third answer to your question is that I actually think that the craft of the first 5 or 6 or 7 chapters of this book is just impeccable. And we talked about it last time. Like, why do we have the pizza deliverator chapter? Y.T and Hiro could meet some other way. The plot doesn't really start until David, you know, gets the virus, and Raven shows up at the concert. So why do we have these other chapters, and why, you know, when those early chapters are happening at the concert and in the metaverse, we're also still following Y.T 6 weeks earlier. I think all of that is brilliant. It's setting the hook, it's doing exposition, it's balancing exposition with action. I think that, like, in this second half, and really about where we started reading, some of the choices about where to linger in the world and where to drive the plot just seemed kind of random to me. Like, why do we need to be on the life raft for like 10,000 pages? You know,
five to 7 chapters.
Yeah, it's a long time. Yeah. And as far as I can tell, the only thing that happens to drive the plot later, apart from learning about reason, which is Hiro spends a little bit of time hacking, which proves useful later. But
that's when he creates SnowScan.
He creates SnowScan, but that could have happened another time, right? Like, he could have done that in a cheap hotel in Port Sherman, you know, or something like that. Or he could have even done that on the raft, you know. The point of the lifeboat is to get us to the raft. You could have had that boat not sink and go to the raft. The Mafia could have flown a helicopter to the raft and dropped Hiro with a parachute into the raft. You could have had a submarine go to the raft. Mr. Ng could have come up with some way to get Hiro to the raft. I mean, there's so many ways. And it's just like, and you know, I think, I mean, the only answer I have is that Stephenson was having a lot of fun putting those characters on a raft and creating this, like, almost like Waiting for Godot, like, interlude, like, in the middle of the book, and then which ends with the pirate Bruce Lee showing up, which is both horrifying, inappropriate, and very entertaining all at the same time. But I guess I feel like the plotting is a little bit clumsy, and that one of the things that gets a little bit clumsier, and maybe because he's got you at that point, so might as well just have fun with this world, but is the decision of when to drive the plot forward quickly and when to just, like, linger, you know. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to spend 5 or 6 chapters on the lifeboat for the sake of the plot.
No, and I think you're totally right. I think you nailed it, that it's like he's having fun, and, you know, and at a certain point in heavily plotted novels, like, this is the corner that you paint yourself into, is like, I mean, imagine poor Tom Clancy.
Poor guy.
I was hoping for a reaction from you.
Well, I mean, I would hate. Well, I don't know.
He certainly doesn't count as upper middle brow.
No, he does not.
He's not.
He's also not poor.
True. But you know, when we're talking about heavily plotted things, yeah. I mean, I guess, you know, like, all sorts of authors struggle with this. It's like, how do you land the goddamn plane when, you have all of these things sort of up in the air. It is what I think lifts this book into success, even though you're right. My sense of the world gets a little foggier in the second half of the book, which should never happen.
Yeah.
Like, it should not get sketchier and a little bit more, because it just does get too plot focused. But I do think, the plane that Stephenson is trying to land is, and I put this in like my second comment here, is like, this book does really feel very prescient in terms of the fact that what Hiro is working against is a monoculture.
Yeah.
And we are, it's funny. It feels like in our current world moment, we are fracturing into hundreds of tiny monocultures, which is not good, because those monocultures sort of just, they just babble to themselves. And there's just so, it does feel very anticipatory. Gosh, he even came up with Google Earth, a decade before Google Earth.
Yeah.
So there are, I think as a novel of ideas and action, it's really hard. He's trying to bolt those two things together, and generally comes out successful.
Well, and yeah, no, Google Earth is brilliant. Earth, which
Earth,
we became
Earth.
Google Earth, and it's actually like, Google based Google Earth on Earth, like that's very conscious, and I believe Meta, the new name of Facebook, was named after the metaverse, and I think that also, we haven't really reached the metaverse yet, but Stephenson was very prescient imagining how people would want to use the internet to create other cultural realities and to create communities that were more appealing than whatever world was happening outside around them, and that would be both brilliant and wonderful and also dangerous. And the metaverse is not altogether bad or altogether good. I do think it's very smart that Stephenson insists on referring to reality as reality with a capital R. And I do think there is a sense that people who lose their sense of reality in this novel, both in the sense of maybe being too enamored with the metaverse, but also, falling into the Elbab Rife, speaking in tongues, viral religion, that is the most dangerous thing that could happen to you, to kind of lose your sense of yourself and lose your sense of reality. The last time I read this, not the most recent time, was several years ago when I was in Guatemala reporting on evangelical Christians in Guatemala. And in particular, I was visiting this Pentecostal megachurch in Guatemala City. And it was where people speak in tongues and do faith healing. And it was very fascinating. I was reading about the history of glossolalia and seeing it in action while reading this novel. And Stephenson, through Y.T, who is our sort of like theological wise person, takes a very dim view of Pentecostalism and charismatic religion. Stephenson does not take a dim view of religion altogether. He suggests through Y.T and through Hiro that faith is a good thing and that religion is a good thing, but that that sort of blind, obedient, charismatic faith that involves a certain degree of mysticism and being swept up into religious sort of orgy is very, very, very dangerous. And, I've been doing some research and reading into this, and I want to be very clear. Evangelical Christians are not inherently evil. Like Martin Luther King was an evangelical Christian. There are many wonderful evangelical Christians out there. That said, the Pentecostal wing of the evangelicals, who also are not all evil. There are wonderful Pentecostal Christians and people, but overwhelmingly the Pentecostal movement embraced Donald Trump in 2016. And they continue to embrace him and think of him as a religious figure, especially very conservative Pentecostal Christians too. And it's a cult. There is a cult-like devotion to Donald Trump among many, many evangelical Christians, and there's been some books about this. And Stephenson's pointing at that kind of thing too. He's looking at how religious fanaticism, religious charisma can rewire your brain in really, really dangerous ways, such that people lose their ability to think critically, and then become controllable by tyrants, which is what the primary antagonist of this book is trying to do.
Is hoping to become.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a book of double entendres and mirrors and equivalencies.
Yeah.
Probably the central line of the book is like, wait a second, are you telling me that Snow Crash is a virus, a drug, or a religion?
Yes.
And then I think Juanita says like, well, what's the difference? And that's such and it's good coming from her, because we've gotten the qualifying information from her before, that religion and faith, like, it doesn't, you can't paint it with that broad a brush. Like, like I have a number of religious friends who talk about the fact that, like, yes, they understand that a lot of it is metaphor, but they still believe in a higher power, and that the world is a hard place to make sense of for them without that sense of something greater. And a lot of artists feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
About this sort of enduring, the sublime.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the sublime is basically the same concept of religion, just ported over to an artistic idea.
Yeah.
And I think, I think for the problems of plotting in the second half, like the number, it's basically a book about the fall of man. There's this section of guns coming to paradise now that the internet is a dangerous place, or the metaverse is a dangerous place. And it's a book that continually cycles back to this idea of Babel, which then he discovers is like, oh, that actually was probably a really good thing for us. There's this weird, bizarre digression where he posits that the metavirus is actually like floating around in space.
It reminds me of some plot points in later Stephenson novels where he seems to think we might be living in a simulation.
There are some wonky, and this was one of my notes, is like there are just some very wonky aspects of this book that managed not to sink the book.
Yeah.
Every time I read it, it still gets me every time. I really love this book. I'm sure a significant portion of that is nostalgia. To rip off Chabon. I have probably exaggerated everything.
I have less nostalgia about it than you do, and I think the first half is just masterful, and I think the second half is still pretty good. It's just I don't think it's quite as masterful. I think I can see this, and it took me. It's on the third read, and as somebody who's done a lot of thinking about narrative and a lot of study between now and when I first read it, I'm starting to see the seams. But it is wonderful. It's a wonderful book, and I've identified ways where I thought in which Stephenson was transphobic, homophobic, gross. There's an awful lot of winking rape humor in there that I can remember finding stuff like that more funny when I was quite younger, and just it's sort of a juvenile form of humor. You're like, pirates, they rape people in the butt.
Yeah, it's like listening to a Pogues album but not getting the irony. You're like, no, they aren't really into rum sodomy in the lash.
Well, you know where that title came from?
No.
It's a quote from Winston Churchill, I believe. You can look this up, but I'm pretty sure that Winston Churchill was trying to instigate some reform or another in the Navy, and somebody said, "Oh, he couldn't do that. That would violate centuries of naval tradition." And he said something like, "Naval tradition, posh! Your naval traditions add up to rum sodomy in the lash." I'm very excited about my trivia that I prepared for you. I mean, do you have time for that?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Hiro observes at least twice, maybe more, but I noticed it twice, that the pirate who calls himself Bruce Lee runs a tight ship. Can you describe the occasion of each of those observations? And I'll give you a hint. I can give you a hint if you need one.
No, I think I got it. One of them is the condoms. He asks his crewmates to display to him that, in fact, he can, that the condoms are not.
And how do we know that the?
They have to blow them up like balloons in front of him as he is inspecting them at random.
The apotheosis of the rape humor. These are the condoms that the pirates are going to use, they think, to rape Hiro and I forget the name of the other boat captain.
The other bringing up of the tight ship is when Hiro and Transubstantiation are navigating sort of the spider web of neighborhoods and stuff that like comprises the raft and is all attached to each other. And I believe it is something about the nature of the ship, of the rowboat that they are rowing itself.
I would almost want a judge to decide whether or not to give it to you. You're right. You're exactly right. The level of detail, though, is that transubstantias that the boy is able to repair the motor, which has been fouled. And so the Zodiac has a little motor, and it stops working, so they have to row for a little bit, but then the boy goes sort of fiddles with the engine for a few minutes, and then he reports that it's working again, and they start it up. And Hiro says, oh yeah, Bruce Lee runs a tight ship.
My trivia question for you is also a little detailed. In the toilet paper chapter, so this is a chapter in the very dead center of the book when we are getting Y.T's narration. And the first thing that Y.T's mom has to do when she shows up at work that day is to read a memo that the United States of America is going to briefly try an experimental situation where federal workers are allowed to bring in toilet paper and pool it in order to deal with some austerity measures that are going on at the United States of America. But employees from other floors are not allowed to raid that particular table of the toilet paper from the toilet paper pool of that particular floor. It's a marvelous chapter. There are recommendations in that memo as to how long it should take the reader to read. First of all, do you know what the exact recommended time is? And then secondly, Y.T's mom knows that her supervisor has a list of actions to take, because all of the supervisors will monitor how long the employees take to read it. What is the punishment for reading the memo for the exact amount of time that the memo suggests it should be read?
Well, I don't remember what the punishment, but the comment was smartass. Was there a punishment? It
needs attitude
adjustment
counseling. Yeah. I believe the exact time is 16 minutes and 42 seconds.
I don't remember that. I do remember that Y.T's mom thought about it and decided to read it slightly quickly. Because
slightly long. Didn't she go slightly longer?
I thought she went slightly quickly because
Maybe
she was in her
quickly.
40s, and that she would show greater efficiency and show that she was management potential. Whereas if you were younger, you would go slightly long to show that you were diligent,
detail-oriented, of course.
That was my recollection. But no, and I'm never gonna probably ever get numbers like that. They don't stick with me. Yeah, and of course, like part of the joke is there is no correct time. You know, like there is no time you spent reading the memo that would get you sort of a good evaluation. Everything would bring you in for some kind of punishment or criticism or monitoring.
Yeah. Nobody wins in the future United States of America.
You know, and it's like another observation about that I'll make is that, you know, we've talked about it. It's pretty clear that I have a strong sense that Neal Stephenson was pretty anti-government and libertarian at this phase in his life too. And I think he still has those tendencies, and but I think he's matured quite a bit, because just like essays I've read and other things I've seen, he does seem to have a greater respect for technocrats. That a lot of his protagonists in more recent books are sort of like benevolent technocrat types, public servants who are trying to do good and are, competent and that kind of thing. And he's also voiced a certain amount of respect for like the value of rule of law too, which, somebody reading Snow Crash who wasn't super mature might feel like this world with no laws and too many guns and burb claves would be kind of a fun place to live. And, it wouldn't be. It would be an awful place to live.
And I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up, because that's where we started. Like, we started by talking about that very anarcho, like, oof, this would not be a good place to live, even though it is fun to read about.
Fun, yeah. Fun to imagine.
So I don't think we're going to say anything we forgot to talk about, because we're long already. But JP Dukes, what is next?
Well, maybe we have to edit this out, but what we agreed to at one point was that our next book was going to be The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, and we need to set a date to actually read it and talk about it. But if all goes according to the plan, listener, the next episode will be the first half of Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley.
Well, until then, everybody who's listening, we are Upper Middlebrow. Please, if you have some time, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to this, and give us a review. If you give us a review, we promise we will read it on the air.
You can also write me at jpd@uppermiddlebrow.com and Chris Bagg at BAGG at uppermiddlebrow.com. I haven't registered that yet, but by the time you hear this, hopefully that'll be registered. Or we'll edit it out.
That will be a real place where you could reach us. That will be my 15th current email address.
All right. Well, listeners, we'll see you next time on Upper Middlebrow. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. And stop.
Oh, hey, just wanted to make sure you knew that Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Jesse Dukes and Chris Bagg are the hosts, producers, and creators. Thanks to our pilot listeners, including Justin Reich, Catherine Nagasawa, Adam Brock, Robert Lorzell, Jenny Grieve, and Josh Lieberless. The music comes from Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. And, I don't know if you can hear, I am on the West Range of the University of Virginia, and it's raining. Maybe you can hear some of the rain sounds. Probably not. Probably what you hear is the HVAC of the Colonnade Club. But I'm looking at a magnolia and a pink and orange crepe myrtle and some ivy in the Virginia fall. See you next time.